Thanks for joining our Bible study lesson today here at St. Peter Able Design Church in Tuscaloosa, where this week we will, and over the next several weeks, we're going to be looking at a topic, humble yourself. He must increase, but I must decrease. Humble yourself, he must increase, but I must decrease. And we're going to start out, since we're in John, we're going to start out in the Gospel of John in chapter 3, verses 22 through 36. And we'll look at some scriptures to reference along as we go along with our study. When we look at humbling ourselves, we think of the word humility. And we can find that word humility means a lack of false pride. We find another definition that means that is an estimate of one's own importance or one rank. And humility, in being humble, in decreasing yourselves, is true that a humble individual who serves the Lord is better off sometimes than a distinguished, intelligent person who are neglecting his soul. So when people know themselves well, they begin to examine their lives carefully. So to humble ourselves, to allow Christ to increase in us and allow us to decrease, will allow us to look at these lessons on humility. In John 3, 22 through 36, the Word of God says, "After these things came Jesus and his disciples in the land of Judah, and there he tarried with them and baptized. And John also was baptized in Aenon near Salem, because there was much water there, and they came and were baptized. But John was not yet cast into prison. Then there arose a question between some of John's disciples and the Jews about purifying. And they came unto John and said unto him, Rabbi, he that was with thee beyond Jordan, to whom thou bearest witness, behold, the same baptized, and all men come to him. John answered and said, A man can receive nothing except it be given from heaven. Ye yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but that I am sent before him. I'm going to stop right there. When we look at, we find that when we look at being humble, when we look at humbleness, we find that it lacks it has a lack of false pride. And we find that to be humble is a state of mind, and you can be an outstanding brother or sister in Christian grace when we humble ourselves. When we understand that it's not about me, but it's about Christ, then we could humble ourselves. When we understand that it's not about the other person, it's not about our job, it's not about our house, our material things, but it's about Jesus, it's about God, because God owns all those things. So, like I said earlier, when we begin to look at ourselves, examine our own self, then we don't want high praise from men. A lot of times when we don't humble ourselves, when people say, oh, you're a great singer, and people follow you to sing, sometimes just to hear you sing. Sometimes people get beside themselves. Even men that can pray really well, women that can pray really well. Some people follow them just to pray. And sometimes to hear them pray, sometimes those people can get the big head. They're not allowing themselves to decrease and allow him to increase. Sometimes they take it among themselves. So how difficult is it for us to be humble? That's a question that often comes up. Many times people will start out being humble. They'll start out with the goal of being humble. They start to show it, but then sometimes that selfishness will sit in, and then pride will take over, and God opposed the pride, right? So we can find that even with Satan, when we look at Isaiah 14:14, it was Satan's original sin. He make himself the most high. Pride was the bait that Satan used when he tempted Eve, and when he set aside God and said and assured her that you shall not. He put that one word in that not. When God said you shall, he said you shall not, and she wanted to be like God. Whenever we sin, God always knows what's best for us. Romans 12:3 tell us that, for I say through the grace given unto me, to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to, but to think soberly, according as God has dealt to every man the measure of faith. I'm going to use Alabama into this, Brother Benny, because, we have some Alabama fans. I see you raise his hand, but he might not like what I'm going to say, because I'm a fan. But what I'm saying is sometimes I know fans that believe Alabama will never lose. I know fans that believe Alabama is the greatest, especially when they were national champ. I know people that that pride set in on Alabama and nothing else could bring them down. But, he said that we need to humble ourselves. We shouldn't think even of ourselves of not being higher than the next man. God look at all of us. In Scripture, it tells us that in his eyesight, we're all alike filthy rags. That, we are equal. We're the same. I mean, we have different jobs. We have different abilities. But in his eyesight, we're equal. One of the things that I wish I could do is sing, but I can't. But some people have that pride that they could just sing, and they don't, they think that they're above everybody else. But he said, don't think more highly than we ought to think. Because when we go up, we got to come down. God allow us to go up and continue to give the increase, but when we let pride set in and not to stay humble, then God knows how to bring us back down. So as Christians, we got to constantly battle with pride and growth and humility. We got to always battle that. If you think that you are better, and so we got to always be on our best guard. There's nothing wrong with being successful. Don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with there's nothing wrong with obtaining things, but when you allow those things to get into your head and allow it to be, you think that you're better than anybody else, and that pride get in and the humbleness move out, then we've allowed Satan to kind of take over. So he said, if anyone easily could have fallen in a trap, it was John the Baptist. If anyone could have fallen into a trap, because John was Jesus' cousin. John, when they were baby, he leaped in the belly when his mother and Mary came into the presence. So if anyone, his cousin, because he was a forerunner for Jesus. And just like we get all tangled up into discussions and disagreements, John had his own disciples, and they were in discussion. They had never seen Jesus up until this point. John knew what his task was, to go be a forerunner. He didn't allow pride to set in when Jesus showed up on the scene and said, no, I've been forerunner for you. I've been baptizing. Now you're here. You can go on. John knew what his place. And sometimes we have to know what our place is. We have to know that, we can't do certain things. We have to know when God or Jesus tell us to do some things. That's what he told us to do, not to add to it. Even in Scripture where, churches and add stuff to the Bible. And Revelation tell us not to add or take away anything that's written in the book. But the humility set in. So John, he enjoyed the success that he had. He was popular at the time, right? all of Jerusalem, all through Judea. He had from the surrounding areas. John was going around baptizing people that was confessing their sins and know that they were going. But then Jesus, he even testified how great of a man John was, because John didn't feel that he was worthy enough to baptize Jesus himself. John, he said, "No, I'm not worthy. You're better." And Jesus said, "No, you have to do this. You got to baptize me." When he did, God spoke from heaven and said, "This is my son. Hear ye him." Jesus knew what he had to do. Now, did pride ever set in with Jesus? I don't think so. I think once you know who you are and who you are, when you know what you know, then pride will never have to set in. Humility, humbleness will stay within your heart. Jesus knew what he came to do. He didn't have to boast. He didn't have to brag. In fact, when he healed people, he always told them, "Hey, don't tell no man." When he performed a miracle, he was like, "Don't go right out and tell," because right now he wasn't ready for all the publicity that was surrounding. He was about his father's business. When his mother and his father was looking for him when he was around 12 years old, Jesus was found in the temple, and when they found him after looking for him, all that time, they approached him in the temple, and he said, "Don't you know about my father's business?" He knew that he was about the business. And when we know that we're about God's business, about Jesus' business, about the business of the world, then we can humble ourselves. Nothing more. I mean, of course, we have to work and we have to take care of our business. Or those of us that are still working, because we got one in here that's retired. But those of us that are still working, we know we have to take care of our affairs. We know we have to do those things, but the way you live is more important than obtaining things. How you live is what God. He's not going to ask you in judgment. Okay, I know you was running after that job to pay for that big old house. I know you was running after that job to pay for those jobs, but you did nothing for me in the gospel. You told nothing about me. You told nobody about how good I have been. You told nobody that I was the reason why you had the health and strength to be able to get up and go to that job. You told nobody that I'm a provider. You told nobody that I'm a healer. You told nobody that I'm the one that the only way you can come to God is by me. You told nobody. But the pride, set in. You never humbled yourself so people could see the Christ in you. So when we look at John, when Jesus, he testified to John in Matthew 11:11. In Matthew 11:11, he give you these words, and I just want to take the time. So one verse, so we can read it over here. 11:11 said, verily I say unto you, among them that are born of women, there have not risen a greater than John the Baptist. Notwithstanding, he that is the least of the kingdom of heaven is greater than his. He knew his place, and we have to know our place. All these things could have fed the pride of the young prophet. John could have had a big head, but he didn't. Yet, we find in the text that John gave the disciples, and he gave them a basic lesson on being humble. When you look down, he says that, for one, it lets us know that John has been cast in prison yet. In verse 24, then there arose a question between the disciples, even within the church. If there's some things that we don't like, some things that we're unsure about, some things that we want to answer to, we're going to begin to question why this or why that. Things are out of order. Because they felt that John was out of order now. Because John was going before him. Now we have Jesus on the scene. Now what you going to do? So John gives them this lesson. He in the face of Jesus and all the growing popularity around him, John, he gives them that one line. Look at verse 30. He said, he must increase. I must decrease. It's convenient. It's for that. I must decrease. It sums up 32 through 30. He must increase. It sums up 31 through 36. So to the extent that John he's growing, in humbleness. He's growing. The story begins. It comes. He's describing these two ministries that were taking place close to one another, and we don't know the exact location that Jesus and John as described here, but they were somewhere along the Jordan River when we research it, and they was using this for baptism. They were baptizing, and as John clarifies in 4 and 2, he said, though Jesus himself baptized not, but his disciples. Though Jesus himself baptized not, he didn't baptize himself, but his disciples. We find that Jesus was not actually performing the baptism, his disciples were. These were not Christian baptism at the point, but it was a public confession of sins. They was immersion of water. It symbolized the cleansing of sins. They was being immersed, and it's interesting to find, we have different types of baptisms. We have sprinkling here, we have the pouring of the water, and we have the immersion. But we find back then they were going underwater. And Jordan, they may have stood in the Jordan River and they took some water and put on them. I don't know. But every example we read about, they were submerged. And Paul added to that comment in 24, where John was not cast in prison. He was letting us know. Because the readers, when you look at Mark's gospel, in Mark's gospel, it makes it seem like Jesus' ministry began after John the Baptist was arrested. In Mark's gospel, we read it. So in John, he lets us know right there that he wasn't in prison yet. So John, he wants us to know that the events that recorded happened before the imprisonment. So when we look at 25, verse 25, then arose a question. Now he's telling that he's letting us know that if you read Mark, it will seem that he's in prison, but when you look at John, that he's in the midst of them, and that question come up. But here's the thing: the apostle, he doesn't give any further clarification in this, so we can only guess what was going on. But probably it has something to do with whether John's baptism was superior. That it doesn't tell us why they were arguing, so to speak. But they wanted to see if John's baptism may have been of purification. Was he doing the right thing? And that led to that question, to where why they questioning John, and John go ahead and let them know that you baptize, you seen me, you bear witness, and then he also said in 28 he says that you bear witness that I said I'm not the Christ. But what I have sent, I am sent before him. He that had the bride is the bridegroom, but the friend of the bridegroom withstandeth and heareth him, rejoiceth greatly. And he used this form in the context, Reba. He used Jesus as the bridegroom. And then he comes to bring people into this joyous relationship with him, not to haggle over these Jewish ceremonies. And he used him as a bridegroom because in those days, we talk about the best man. Now the best man, when you go to a wedding, he usually walk out with the groom and the preacher and just stand there. But when you research back in the biblical times, the best man would be the one to bring the bride to the bridegroom. And, now things have changed over the years to where they have all these different functions where they hold the ring, and, in some cases, the bride, the best man is there to make sure the groom is straight and make sure his heart is good. But then he would bring, and he would be the one to give them. Nowadays, you got the uncle bringing them down, you got the brother, you got the father, if he's still living, bringing them down. Even in some cases, the father is dead and there's no brother. Mom brings the bride down and give them away. But in these cases, he used John because John was to them like the best man, like Jesus' best man. And John's disciples, they came with this concern in verse 26 where it said, Rabbi, he who was with you beyond the Jordan, to whom have you testified? Behold, he's baptizing all that are coming to him. Now Jesus is baptizing all that are coming, and it brings a question. Now they're jealous. And on John's behalf, that this is, John had disciples. So now you got Jesus show up on the scene, and John humbling himself, and he's teaching his disciples. Be humble. His disciples are concerned because John was getting all that fame. And even with us in society, sometimes we can have a close family member, our husband, our wife can have success, and now somebody else shows up on the scene and they're not paying them any attention anymore. Well, pride will begin to set in, and we want to know why our loved one is not getting the recognition and attention that they were once getting. Somebody else is, instead of allowing humbleness to settle in. So they were jealous on John's behalf. And they're setting the stage for his reply in 27 and 30. John answered and said, a man can receive nothing except it be given to him from heaven. We can't receive anything. Everything that we own come from God. Right? Unless God allows what we have, God authorized what we have to be so. It says, except it be given from him, ye yourselves bear witness that I said I am not Christ, but I am that I am sent. And then he had the bride is the bridegroom, but the friend of the bridegroom, which standeth and heareth him, rejoiceth greatly because of the bride. The friend should rejoice for the bridegroom. He should rejoice. We should rejoice for somebody that's being blessed. We should rejoice for somebody. Instead, sometimes we allow pride to say that we should rejoice if somebody was able to buy a Lamborghini in this church. We should rejoice if somebody got a $1 million home. But instead, our pride will set in, and our nose will turn up, and our mouth will go a different way, and that pride set in because sometimes we, instead of being humble and know that the same God that can provide that for them is the same God that can provide for us. You just have to set away, share and believe that he can do it. So John clearly understood what God wanted him to do, who Jesus is, and who John was, and he didn't have to defend himself. He really didn't have to tell his disciples, and he didn't have to defend them, but he did. He humbled himself and allowed him to. He wasn't, out to build his own self-esteem. He wasn't out to promote his own ministry or reputation. He aimed to exalt Jesus because that was what he came to do. He was a forerunner for Jesus, and that was his job, is to go be the forerunner, go baptize until the end. But when Jesus ready to take over in ministry, then John must decrease. So Jesus can increase. He found great joy in the role of handing the bride off to the bridegroom. Like I said, back in those days when you studied weddings and things that were going on back then, the best man brought down the lady. Okay, but we can see that John, he replies to his worried disciples. They was worried. A man can receive nothing unless it's sent from heaven. We can receive nothing. I'm saying that to our family at St. Peter's. We can receive nothing unless it's given from heaven. And God said every great good and perfect gift come down from him. I would rather have gifts from God than to have gifts from man. Yes, stuff can be tangible and all, but God still can send people our way to give us blessings that he authorized us to have. John had his word report. He calmed his disciples down. He emphasized that even Jesus over in John, I think John 6 and 65, Jesus, he said, therefore I say unto you that no man can come unto me except it were given unto him of the Father. Even God have to give us authorization to come to Jesus. But here, we find that special reference to our ministries. We find that he's saying that John is saying that his role as a forerunner was given to him by God, and he got to stay in his role. And his word apply to Jesus. Any popularity, any success that he enjoyed, it came from God. Anything that we can enjoy. I say that God give us our health and strength, and that we should be thankful for, because there's some people at DCH right now trying to understand, they wish they were able to move themselves. They wish they were able to get up and bathe themselves. They wish they had health and strength. And some of us, each and every day, God has given it to us, and we don't acknowledge that it came from Him. We don't acknowledge that He had blessed us with those things. But His word applies. Not only did it apply to John, to Jesus, it applies to us too. So in 1 Corinthians, I'm going to close here with 1 Corinthians 12, and verses 4 through 6. 1 Corinthians 12, verses 4 through 6. And it tells us that now there are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit. It said, and there are differences of administrations, but the same Lord. And there are diversities of operation, but the same God that work within all of us. There are varies of the effects, but the same God who work in all persons. There's not a different God that apply to each one of us, Benny. There's not a different God that apply to you and a different God that apply to someone else. It's the same God. And he adds, in verse 11, he said, but all these worketh that one and the same self-spirit, dividing to every man severely as he will. But one and the same Spirit, all these things, is distributed into each one of us individually, just as he will. In other words, God gives different spiritual gifts, ministries, and results according to his sovereign will. And we have to humble ourselves, right? He gave us these gifts. He didn't give me the gift of singing. But I'm still humble. I might, try and sing. You may run out of here, but he didn't give it to me, but he may give it to someone else. He gives someone else the ability to pray that someone else can. He gives the ability to preach that someone else can. To teach that others can do it. So I'm going to end, and I want to thank you all for joining this study lesson on humbling yourself. He must increase and we must decrease, from John chapter 3, 22 through 36. Thank you. Okay.